Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make these delicious plant-based beef samosas. They are crunchy on the outside, juicy and delicious on the inside. This recipe pays homage to my childhood in Tanzania where I used to have these on a regular basis. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make your samosa wrappers, how to make a delicious filling, as well as 2 different ways to wrap your samosas and 2 different ways to cook your samosas. As always, the full recipe is available on my website, which has been linked in the caption below. If this is the type of video you're interested in, please keep watching. I'm going to start by making my own homemade samosa wrappers. If you're using a store-bought version, you can skip to the next chapter. I start by measuring out about 230 grams of flour, which is about 2.5 cups of flour. I prefer to use weights. I find that these are a lot more predictable than just using cup measurements. Once I've measured out my flour, I start to add in water a little bit at a time. You don't want to add too much water because you don't want the dough to be sticky. As the dough has come together, then I start to knead it into a soft ball. If the dough gets too sticky, feel free to add a little bit of flour, about a tablespoon at a time. You want to make sure that you knead your dough so it's nice and soft but not sticky. Once I get to the consistency I'm looking for, I put it in a bowl and let it rest and move on to making my filling. So while our dough is resting, I moved on to make the filling. I am using Beyond Meat for this recipe. You can use Impossible. You can use any type of plant-based mince you have available to you. I know that there are vegetarian-friendly samosas that use potatoes and peas, but we really want that plant-based beef samosas. So hence why I'm using the plant-based mince. So Beyond Meat, when you cook it, it starts by releasing all of its juices and then eventually it starts to crisp up. Once it starts to crisp up, that's where I know that I have to add in my spices. It's almost like you're cooking with real ground beef. When I was doing the research for this recipe across the board, cumin seeds, garam masala, black pepper, and salt were pretty consistent across all the recipes I saw. So those were the spices I used for this recipe. Once the spices went in, I added in my veggies. Usually you will see onions and maybe green onions or scallions. The carrots and the green bell pepper are my personal addition. Some people do add carrots and other vegetables. It's all up to personal preference. You just want to make sure you cut them really small so when they cook it just melts in with the mince and everything cooks evenly. So once the veggies were in, I just let this cook for about 10 minutes till everything had softened up, and I took it off the heat and then let it cool down. You don't want to be stuffing your samosas with hot stuffing because then it just breaks everything apart. So once everything was cooked, I set it aside, let it cool down, and then I moved on to finishing up my wrappers. Now that my wrap has rested for about an hour, I'm going to shape it into a log, and this is how I'm going to divide up my portions. I actually weighed the amount of dough I had, and from there I divided it into 5. I think 6 is probably the best way to divide up the dough. This way when you roll it out, it is nice and thin, but it doesn't break, and you have enough to wrap a good amount of samosas. So I took one of the pieces that I had portioned out and rolled it into a circle about 5 inches in diameter. You don't have to measure, I just do it just for more consistency. Then I smeared it with a generous amount of oil and sprinkled a generous amount of flour on top. This is very important. It helps to separate out our layers. And I took another ball, rolled it out to about the same size, and then I stacked the one that I had smeared with some oil and flour on top, and then made sure that the edges touch. Our layers are separated by the oil and the flour, so being generous with the amount of oil you add and flour is very important. I took another ball, rolled it out to about the same size, smeared it with some oil and flour, and then stacked my other stack on top. So now we have 3 layers, and in between each layer you have a generous amount of oil and flour separating them. Some people will continue and make layers of 6 to 7 circles, but I find that for beginners, starting with a stack of 2 to 3 layers is the best because you get a lot of control on how well you roll everything out in the end. So I moved on to make another stack where I took the ball that I had measured out, rolled it out to about 5 inches in diameter, smeared some oil on it, sprinkled with some flour, set it aside, took another ball, and then stacked it on top, and we have our second stack. If you double, triple this recipe, you can make multiple stacks of 2 to 3 layers that you're going to use for your wrappers. When you're done making your stacks, now you're going to roll out your stacks into large circles. You want to be very careful how you roll it out. Once I pass my rolling pin over it once, I flip it over and repeat the rolling process, applying even pressure. You want to roll out your circles to about 11 to 12 inches in diameter. To be very honest, you can go as much as 13 inches, but you don't want to make a circle larger than the pan that you have available. My pan is about 11 inches in diameter, so having a circle that's about 12 inches does the job. The more you roll it out, the thinner your layers will be, which could make for a flakier crust. Don't want to over roll it, otherwise it will be too thin. So when you separate out your layers, it is going to break, it is going to crack, and you don't want that. So to be on the safer side, this should give you a circle that is between 10 to 11 inches in diameter, 12 inches if you're pushing it. While I'm rolling out my wrappers, I have a non-stick pan on the stove. I heat it up at medium heat, and by the time I'm done rolling it out, the pan is nice and hot. You want to cook your layers about a minute to 2 minutes on each side. We're not cooking this through, you're just cooking it so that the top goes from white to translucent. Then you flip it over and let it cook till you'll start to see air pockets. You take it off the heat and set it aside.
Beside me, I don't mind when it's just us two. That corner coffee shop we like to go. Late night walks with you to take me home. With you I never feel alone.
After my wrappers were cooked, I let it cool down for about 5 minutes and then started to peel my layers. How you shape your samosas can dictate how you peel your layers. For my quarter circle method, I started by cutting my wrapper into semicircles and then started to remove the layers. You want to be as gentle as possible. Take your time and be patient. It's not going to be perfect. There will be a few rips. Just take your time and the layers will start to come off. This is why it's really important to make sure that you put enough oil and flour when you are rolling out your layers, and make sure to roll it out evenly with even pressure so that you don't have uneven shaped layers and layers that just don't come apart. As you can see, there are a few rips in my semicircles, but they're all salvageable. I also cut my semicircles into half to get my quarter circles. This also helps to peel away the layers a little better. Even if there are rips, you can make it work. You can see that I'm practicing my cone shape method on some of the quarter circles that just had such terrible edges, but it works. You can salvage it. Just be patient and you will get enough.
These little songs make me glad to call you.
For the strip method, I basically cut my circles into strips and then pulled them apart to get these long rectangular strips.
And you have got my head in the clouds.
1, 2, 3. All that I need is your body next to me on rainy days. Just need your company, don't need too much. Just your simple love and it's everything. The simple joy of hearing your voice every morning. I wake to everything.
We're first going to start with the strip method of stuffing your samosas. Before I stuff all of my samosas, I like to do a practice run just to see how I am folding up my samosas. So once everything is stuffed, it's just go time and there's no room for mistakes. So now that I've kind of figured out my path, it is now time to stuff it. So I start by folding to get a right triangle that is facing upright. Then I add in my glue. The glue is just basically all-purpose flour mixed with enough water to get a thick paste. This holds everything together. After a generous smear, I fold it upside down and then I fold it again. This strip is long, so I give it 3 folds before I stuff it, making sure that I have pressed everything together so that the glue holds all of the sides well. You want to make sure that you use a generous amount of glue, especially if you are new to this, just so that everything holds well. After my 3rd fold, this is where I am going to stuff my samosa. I hold the triangle in my hand almost like a cone, and a natural hole just kind of opens up. Then I stuff it with my stuffing. I will actually suggest using a fork. A spoon is just way too wide. It gets really messy, and with a fork, I find it's easier to just guide all of the stuffing really deep inside. So now that I have stuffed, pretty much overstuffed the samosa, this is also why I like to use my own wrappers. I make them nice and thick. I find that that's actually really good for beginners. When your wrapper is nice and and thick, it's very hard for it to rip. Now that everything is really well stuffed, I have a flap left that I'm going to use to seal the samosas. I'm going to add a lot of my glue, again, just to make sure that everything adheres, and then I fold my samosas into the flap. I make sure that all of my corners are well sealed, and if it's not, I just go back, seal it properly. A little bit of water, a little bit of glue does the job, and here we have our first wrapped samosa. It's not easy, but lots of practice definitely helps. And if you're a beginner, I suggest using a flat surface. Again, practicing how you want to fold your samosas and then going in with the stuffing. So I started by folding a right triangle, adding my glue, and then folding it upside down. This strip is not too long, so just 2 folds is enough to get to my desired cone. And then I hold it inside my hand, and then I have a natural crevice that opens up. I stuff it with my stuffing. Again, we're not being too stingy here, so we're adding a lot of stuffing. Press that in. Again, our homemade wrappers are nice and thick, so you don't have to worry about ripping a hole in between. As you get more comfortable making your own homemade wrappers, you can make them thinner and thinner. The flour water mixture is actually pretty durable, so you can go as thin as you possibly can, but not too thin to rip it up. Anyway, that is for advanced. We're still at the beginner stage. So I'm gonna stuff these samosas very, very well using my fingers to push it in. So once everything has been nice and squeezed, then it's time to seal everything up. So I'm adding some more glue on one side and then folding it into the flap. And then I'm going to have a little bit of my flap left. This is where I'm going to apply some glue. I check my edges and my corners to make sure that everything is nice and sealed. The flap is a little crooked, so I cut a piece off just to make sure it's a little bit more straight. Add my glue to it and then fold my triangle into the flap to seal everything well. So when I started making samosas in 2020, this is the method that I started using to make my samosas. I know it is not the easiest to start as a beginner, but I find that it really gives a lot of leeway because you have a lot of extra wrapping in case any hole opens up, in case you need that extra flap to fold and make sure that everything is well contained. There's so many different ways to make samosas. YouTube is literally a library full of different samosa techniques. So here are just a few of the many ways that you can make it. If you don't want to make your own samosa wrapping, you can buy store-bought frozen spring roll / samosa wrappers. I got this at Walmart. They're very cheap. You can get them at many major grocery stores. All you need to do is take them out of the freezer, let them thaw, and cut your strips. And it's a square, so you don't need to be doing any type of surgery to remove any of the rounded edges. Just some good old strips. So why I also prefer my own wrappers is that these can be quite thin even if you stack them, and I find that it's a lot more flimsy and harder to fold. I had to practice and practice, and then I figured out something that works best for me. When you're using the store-bought wrappers, it is really, really important to glue everything down well because it is very thin. It can be flimsy and hard to hold, especially to create that cone structure. So I use a chopstick just to kind of open up the hole a little bit so I know exactly where I am stuffing into. I let the flap fold towards me so then I can just close it up like an envelope. You also want to be a lot careful when you are stuffing this because the wrapper is a lot thinner. You don't want to be poking holes in there. So be as gentle as you possibly can, but you can also, stuff these really, really well. So just be very careful. Do it slowly, one at a time, especially if you are new to this. The stuffing and folding process is pretty much the same way as if I had made my own wrappers. They just come out a little smaller. So once everything is nice and stuffed, I use my hand to just push it in, use my fingers to push everything in, and then add my glue on the rest of the strip. And that is what I'm going to use to seal my samosas. Make sure all the edges and corners are also well sealed so that when you fry it, nothing leaks out.
Walking to the market, strolling hand in hand, exchanging letters when you're away. Don't need any effort when we are together. We always have fun throughout the
Just like the strip method, for my quarter circle method, I always start by practicing how I'm going to do the fold, just so that I can address any rips, any tears, and know exactly how I want to fold the samosas. For this quarter circle, the edges were a bit thin, so I cut it off and created a new rounded edge. To create the cone that I'm going to use to stuff my samosas, I have the pointy edge facing away from me and the rounded edge facing towards me. Then I bring the sides of the rounded edges together to make the bottom of a cone. Then I glue it all together to shape my cone.
When you say you love me, I seem to ascend to the heavens above, where we fall in love. I don't know what I would do without you, because all I need.
Once the bottom of my cone is done, I pick it up and I am ready to stuff my samosas.
Make me fly to the clouds. 1, 2, 3.
I'm using a lentil-based stuffing for this one. This is just for demonstration purposes only. I wanted to refilm this process so you guys can see how exactly I do it. If you don't have Beyond Meat, lentils are actually a really good alternative for the stuffing. You can follow my stuffing recipe exactly, but using lentils instead. All the instructions are in my blog post. So I'm using a fork to stuff my samosas. Once I have enough stuffing in the samosa, I just check my edges to see that everything is properly sealed. Add some extra glue just to make sure that the bottom of the cone is well sealed. You don't want any of the stuffing to come out when you are frying your samosas. I push my samosa stuffing in to get it to the bottom of the cone as much as possible. The rounded side, there was a bit of the flap left over, so I tucked it in before I finally closed it up. So that pointed edge that was facing away from us, that is going to be our flap that we use to seal our samosa cone, and that is pretty much it.
Just need your company, don't need too much. Just your simple loving itself.
So the two methods that I have shown you both have their advantages and disadvantages. The quarter circle method requires less folding and origami to get a closed samosa shape, but making the quarter circle wrapping can be challenging. Meanwhile, the strip method, the strips come apart very easily, but when you're actually stuffing it, it can be a bit of a challenge. So try both of them and see what works best for you. Again, I'm going to show you how I do the quarter circle method again. I took another quarter circle. The edges were a bit thick, so I'm just cutting another rounded edge, and then I will proceed to shape my samosa.
Just your simple loving itself.
To shape the samosa, I have the pointy side facing away from me and the rounded edge facing towards me. I bring the sides of the rounded edge together to make my samosa cone. Here, I'm just practicing how I'm going to shape it. And then I start to apply my glue to seal the bottom of my cone properly.
Hearing your voice every morning, I wake to a kiss on my face, so I don't need too much. Just your simple loving itself.
Once the bottom of my cone is well sealed, it's time to stuff my samosas. Again, I'm using a lentil-based stuffing just for demonstration purposes. Once my samosa is well stuffed, I push everything in and then I start to seal the top. I'm adding some glue to the flap that I'm going to use to seal it. The rounded edge, I bring it in again to start the sealing process before I use my flap to fold everything over. And then I make sure that all the corners are nicely sealed, and that is our quarter circle method to shape samosas.
Can't imagine living life
If we were to go our separate ways,
'cause with you I feel like
who knows how.
There are two ways in which you can cook your samosas. The first and traditional way is to fry them in some oil. So I plopped a few of my samosas in some oil and let them fry till they started to turn golden brown. If the flaps start to lift a little bit, don't worry, the samosa is well sealed and the extra flaps add character. For all those pieces that you had to cut off your wrappers, you can fry them in some oil like chips. You're going to fry your samosas till it's nice and golden brown, then you can take them out of the oil and place them on a plate lined with paper towel. For the air fryer method, just plop your samosas in the air fryer, add a little bit of oil just to properly coat the samosas, and then fry them at 375 degrees for about 20 minutes or till golden brown, flipping them halfway. So these are your samosas. They are crunchy, golden brown, juicy on the inside. There's not much of a difference from air fried versus fried, especially if you're using your own homemade wrappers, and they are absolutely delicious. You can find a very detailed recipe in the caption below with some extra tips, tricks, substitutions, answering all of your questions. These were a labor of love, and I'm so glad that I was able to prepare a recipe for you all. So if you like these type of videos, make sure to subscribe to my channel, give this video a big thumbs up, hit that notification bell, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.
Is your body next to me on rainy days? Just need your company.